Am I on? Good. All right, so we've been looking at the life, really, of Elijah in the context of the rule of Ahab. And Ahab's been ruling for a little over 20 years. And I pulled up a little bit of a timeline here for you guys to see. Can you guys see this? Can you see is it big enough? Even in the back? If you're in the back and you can't see it, then look at all these empty rows. There's a lot of empty rows. So it's a long room. It's not really it's a long room. So hey, listen, you know, if you want a copy of it, if you want a screenshot of it, send me an email. I'll get you a copy of it. But I'll get you actually a lot better than this. I'll get you the whole timeline of Israelite and Judahite kings and some other stuff. But it's been 20 years. So we're looking here at the left side at Ahab. It's been a little over 20 years of Ahab's rule. 20 years of idolatry and opposition to the Lord. 20 years of suppression of the truth of God's word. Ahab was the worst. He was the worst king up until his time. The worst. You know, I say that. I've been saying that throughout Ahab's rule, and, you know, there are certain people in public office today that you think about, right? And it's, you know, maybe a little better lately, but, you know, you wonder who has and hasn't lost their mind at times. And you also wonder, you know, how far away certain politicians are getting away from what God says and really standing by Satan's agenda. But Ahab was the worst. He was the worst king of Israel up until his time. He persecuted God's prophets. He murdered an innocent man and stole his vineyard. And now he's dead. A random arrow that some guy just, you know, the image we had last week was, I'm going to shoot this arrow in this battle. Where should I shoot it? Right there. You know, one of those things. A random arrow struck Ahab right in the exact spot between his armor and struck him and killed him, and he died. And the dogs licked up the blood that was washed out of his chariot in Samaria. Last week we saw Ahab's demise. We also saw Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat's the king of Judah down in the south. Now, just as a quick reminder, if we're looking at the northern kingdom of Israel, this was Ahab's land, this was Jehoshaphat's land. You might remember that the two kings are now bound in marriage. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Jehoshaphat married into Ahab's family, bound through marriage, and that these two kings fought against the Syrians, and that's how Ahab died. So that's just a little bit of our context. But Israel and Judah are on separate paths. And today's passage will make that abundantly clear in how we end 1 Kings. So we'll start by looking at Jehoshaphat's rule. We'll see the beginning and the length of his rule, which is something we've seen the same pattern with all the kings in verses 41 and 42, or in 1 Kings 22. Now, Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, became king over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. So from the time he was 35 until the time he was 60, right? 45, 55, 60. And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. So we first saw Jehoshaphat way back in chapter 15 and verse 24, which was seven chapters ago. His father died back in that chapter. Jehoshaphat becomes king, and we don't see him again until this chapter. So a lot has happened. Obviously, Ahab dies in battle. Jehoshaphat escapes. Remember, Ahab's like, hey, look, I got an idea. Jehoshaphat, you dress like the king, and I'll just dress like some random guy, and, then that's how we're going to go to battle. And Jehoshaphat's like, Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let me do that. You know, the enemy only wants to fight against the king. Let me dress up like a king. That sounds perfect. I don't know what he was thinking there, but Ahab is a manipulative person. Well, Ahab dies in battle. Jehoshaphat escapes with his life. Jehoshaphat's rule starts in 1 Kings 15:24, and it goes all the way up until 2 Kings 8. So we're talking about like 15 chapters of Kings. And 1 Kings is 22 chapters. And 2 Kings is 25 chapters. So what's 22 and 25 is 47? Like a third of the chapters of 1st and 2nd Kings, Jehoshaphat is ruling. His rule extends through such a large portion of the text, even though there's really not a ton said about him. Much more time spent talking about the northern kings of Israel and the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Well, anyway, notice that King Asa, notice that he becomes, and I want you to pay attention to some of the, King Jehoshaphat. I want you to pay attention to some of this. He begins his rule he becomes king in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Now check this out. Let me see if I could do this. Yeah. We're going to go with pen. Ahab begins his rule in 874. And when did Jehoshaphat begin his rule? According to the text of Scripture? In the 4th year, the text of Scripture says, in the 4th year of the rule of Ahab. Now, our timeline says, so that should be what? What year? 871, 870, depending on how you count. We're going to say 870 for the sake of the argument. We're going to say 870. So this should be 870. So our timeline says that Jehoshaphat began his rule in 873. So either the Bible's wrong or the timeline is wrong. Which one do you think's wrong? I mean, if you have to choose, you're going to say, obviously it's not the Bible. Obviously the Bible's right. But what if I told you that the Bible is right and the timeline is right? What would you say? What's that? Hold on, what was that in the back? Well, you're going to get the answer. But if I'm just looking at, I would just say, let me clean up my math. All right, let me look at the math and make sure the math is right here because, 874 minus 4 years. Because remember, we're going the other direction on the timeline. We're counting down to year 1. So 874, 4 years later would be, the 4th year would be, let's call it 870. But 873. Looking at this timeline, what do you see? Do you see anything that sticks out? You see it? Anyone else see anything that sticks out? Couple, Joe, Paul. So Asa's rule ends in the 4th year of Ahab's rule, in the 4th year of Ahab's reign. So what happens here is that Asa and Jehoshaphat both rule from 873 to 870. There's a co-regency. And some of the reason, check this out, what we actually see, no, I don't want to keep those. Oh, man. What we actually see is this, check this out. In 1 Kings 15, 23 and 24, we notice something about Asa. Now, the rest of all the acts of Asa and all his might and all that he did and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? But in the time of his old age, he was diseased in his feet. And Asa slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his place. So we actually see that at the end of Asa's rule, there was disease. And that really kind of corresponds with the time that Jehoshaphat begins his rule right around 873. Jehoshaphat's ruling with his father. If we go back to our timeline, Jehoshaphat's ruling with his father from 873 to 870, and then when Asa dies in 870, that's what the writer of Kings is dealing with. That's the timeline the writer of Kings is dealing with. So sometimes when you add up all the numbers don't add up perfectly, and you say, wait a minute, something's not right here. Well, this timeline is taken into account all these different things. It's taken into account how Chronicles ordered things, how Kings ordered things, other stuff like that, and it actually is, it's actually pretty brilliant. Actually, there's 2 or 3 different timelines this is based on, but they ruled together for 3 years, and so when the writer says that he began his rule in the 4th year of Ahab, it's talking about his independent rule. It's talking about the time that he begins ruling by himself. So don't let somebody who comes in and say, they'd come in and make some other claim and say the Bible's wrong here. The Bible's not wrong. The Bible's never wrong. It only takes the world some time sometimes to catch up to the truth that we find in the Bible and figure out some of those things. But anyway, I thought you might find that interesting. Now, it's been a long time since we've read about the kings of Judah in the south. It's been a long time since we've read about these guys and about all these guys on the right side of our chart: Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat. It's been a long time, and that's because nothing's really happening in Judah at this point. Nothing bad, at least. So if you look at it, there's a lot of stability going on here. Check this out. So what we have here is, let's use this. We have Asa ruling for 41 years. And then we have Jehoshaphat ruling for another 25 years. In all, what you end up having here is these kings together rule for a total of 66 years. And they worship the Lord. That's stability. 2 rulers in 66 years. You know, our church has been pretty stable with that type of thing lately. I don't know if it was always. I think the first pastor was here for like 5 years, and the next pastor was here for like 10, and the next guy was like 8. Pastor Thorne was here for 20 years. 20 years. And I've been here now coming up on 12 years. That's 32 years. 32 years for the last 2. The average, some years ago, a survey suggested that the average pastoral tenure was like a little over 3 years. I think there was another one done several years after that showed it to be closer to about 7 years before a pastor moves on. And some of that's like, Sonny, I've been here long before you were, and I'll be here long after you're gone. Like the pastor's the hired gun. But the lifer is the guy, he's the guy that's really in charge. And some of that stuff happens in a church, but here, we don't have that. We might have had a touch of that when I showed up. Might have had a touch of that was off in the shadows waiting to kind of come in, but we don't have that here. And I'm, again, 32 years, 2 pastors, I'm not planning on going anywhere. Not yet. So if for some of you, you're like, yeah, this is fantastic. I hope you don't. I hope you never. I hope I can preach until I'm 75 years old. I think I might be able to if I don't lose my mind before then. Although this morning, oh man. So I'm focused on my message, as I always am. I got my brother texting me about something that has nothing to do with, by the way, don't text me about stuff Sunday morning that has nothing to do with worship. Okay, don't do that. But he's texting me, and I'll tell you what he was texting me about later on, because it actually is relatively pertinent to the message. And I'm reviewing Sunday morning's message, and every morning I take a cup of water and I fill it and I put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and I use that to do a nasal rinse. And so I do that. I fill the cup and I put it in the microwave and I go do some other things, and then I come back to the microwave and I pull the cup out and it's completely empty. And I realize I just put an empty cup in the microwave. So I am losing my mind. But if I don't lose my mind, anyone do that type of thing? You ever do that type of thing? You know, all the old guys are like, yep. And the young guys my age are just like, nope, doesn't happen. Paul, no? You don't ever yeah. It was a couple of weeks ago, I forgot John De Palma. I drove right past his house. I'm like, I gotta go, I'm going to John De Palma's house. And I just kept driving, and I get a text, and I checked it. And it was like, don't be late, or something like that. I hope, when are you going to be here? I don't want to be late to the breakfast. And I'm like, oh, I'm already in Wind Gap. I forgot to pick you up. I don't even know what happened. I'm driving to your house right now. I'm not even realizing I missed. So look, if I don't lose my mind, I want to preach until I'm 75. And some of you guys might be like, great, I want you to stay. Some of you guys, that's bad news. For some of you guys, you're like, I'm waiting. For those of you who are waiting me out, you might be waiting a while. You might be waiting a while. I'm hoping to break the record for the longest tenured pastor in our church. But you never know what happens. I could die tomorrow, right? Any one of us can die tomorrow. I could die tomorrow, and things can change in a year, and who knows. But you have a long tenured leadership here in Judah. Over that same period of time, there's going to be 9 Israelite kings. So if you look at 9/11, the year 9/11, for the beginning of Asa's rule, you have Jeroboam, who's still ruling until 910. You have Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, Ahab, go all the way down through the end of Jehoshaphat's reign, Ahaziah, and Joram. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different kings that ruled in Israel during the tenure of just these 2 kings. There's political turmoil in the north. For instance, Nadab, up there, the second guy on the list, Nadab rules for a little over a year, 2 years it's listed. Elah rules for a little over a year, 2 years. Zimri rules for a week. A week. You imagine, becoming the king for a week? You remember that guy? Remember, he saw his. He burned the house down over himself. Ahaziah will rule for 2 years. We're in our 4th dynasty, Jeroboam's dynasty, Baasha's dynasty, Zimri's, 1 week dynasty, and of course the house of Omri, which will see its end before long. So we've seen all types of political instability in the north. We've seen spiritual turmoil in the north, spiritual instability. In Judah, in the kingdom of Judah, Asa and Jehoshaphat, they're worshiping the Lord. In Israel, they're worshiping false gods. They're worshiping Baal and Asherah. Jezebel's up there, bringing in her Syrophoenician gods and goddesses. Their kings up there have been many and evil. And Israel up north has been at war. They've been at war against Syria. They've been at war against the Lord. And so you can see why the text has been away from the kings of Judah and is focused on the situation in Israel. Because all the warnings and all the negative examples, they're coming from Israel. They're coming from the kings of Israel. And so God is sending prophets to these kings. And those kings are ignoring what God has said. But now, we are back to Judah on the right side of the chart. Kings doesn't tell us a whole lot about Jehoshaphat's reign. Chronicles will tell us considerably more. I'll just give you a couple things real quick. We're going to spend 2 weeks just reviewing a few things out of Chronicles that I thought it was really important for us to look at. But just in a quick summary, Jehoshaphat fortifies the cities of Judah. He follows the example of David worshiping the Lord in Chronicles. He has great riches and honor. He establishes teachers to teach the people about the Lord. The Philistines and the Arabians bring tribute money to him, like tax money to him. He amasses a large and powerful army. But, as we know, one of the big negatives is what? You tell me one of the big negatives of Jehoshaphat's life that Kings tells us. Brittany. He marries into the family of Ahab. And he's tricked. He becomes an ally with this wicked king in battle. He ignores what God says through the prophet Micaiah, and he allows himself to be tricked and schemed by this evil king of the north, Ahab. There's a lot of good stuff about Jehoshaphat in Chronicles. So again, we'll spend a couple of weeks looking at him before we go into 2 Kings. But there's not really a whole lot about him in Kings, period. So his rule extends for a large portion of the text, and not a lot said about him. But notice what the writer of Kings does say about him. Check this out in verse 43. He walked in all the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing right in the sight of the Lord. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Now, it's interesting to me that he's compared to Asa here and not to David. Now, Asa has, some small stains on his record. So does David. But David is the standard of the kings. So when you measure all these kings, he did right like his father David. And that could be his grandfather, or his great-grandfather, his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But they're going to go back to David. David is the standard, even though we know there's some problems there in David's life. Why not say he did Chronicles will talk about how he was like David, but the Kings doesn't. And I look at it and I say, maybe it's his alliance with Ahab. Maybe it's his intermarriage with the family of Ahab that kind of tainted things. Maybe it's the fact that he hasn't removed all the high places. The high places were not taken away. They would have worshipped in Jerusalem. They would have made shrines on certain hills in Jerusalem. So maybe that's why he's compared. We don't know, but maybe that's why some of these things. That's why he's compared to Asa, his father, and not to the standard of good kings, who is David. Whatever the case, Jehoshaphat, check this out. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And that's more important than any other accomplishment in this life. It's more important than all the silver and gold in the world. It's more important than whatever prestige you might hold in the eyes of lost people, or whatever position you might hold at work, or any group of friends list you have, is what would God write about you if you were in his book. What would God write about you, about whether you did that which was right in the sight of the Lord? Would God say, and since, Paul, you said you've never experienced this, I'm going to bring you up. Would God say, Paul Macaron did that which was right in the sight of the Lord? Or insert your name, whatever, you put your name in there. Or would he say, Steve Leap did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord? What would he write about you? Jehoshaphat made peace with the king of Israel in verse 44. He made peace with Ahab. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel, which is a good thing because it brings peace to the two nations. But again, it's a bad thing because those kings up there are evil. They're evil. And look what else he did that was good. Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat and his might which he showed and how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Which, again, we're going to spend a couple weeks looking at that a little bit. The remnant of the Sodomites who remained in the days of his father Asa, he expelled from the land. Well, that's an interesting note to kind of throw, right? Isn't that kind of, it's like we got this whole description, this short description of Jehoshaphat. The rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Judah? By the way, he kicked out all the Sodomites. It's like, okay, that's an interesting note, that he expels the Sodomites. Now, I looked this up. I've looked this up more than once. I've looked this up. And did you know that sodomy, we know what sodomy is, right? We don't have to go into that description there. Okay, good. If you don't know what sodomy is, talk to me after. I'm not going to give you a detailed description, but, basically homosexual behavior. Sodomy was a crime in America. Did you know that? Up until the 1960s, it was an enforced crime in the United States. And it wasn't until the 2000s, listen to this, the early 2000s, Isabel and I, we have all these conversations. She says, it's just, these things seem normal in society now. The early 2000s. I was in my 20s, Isabella. I was in my 20s when the states began to repeal sodomy laws. It wasn't until the 2000s when they started to strike those laws from the law books. That tells me that sodomy was on the books as a crime up until 20 years ago in this country. 20 years ago, that's it. Look how things have changed. Now, you're proud. RuPaul, when I was a kid, RuPaul I thought it was a joke. It's not today. Now you're proud to be gay. You're proud to be gay. Because there is no shame in America. It was a crime in Israel, and it's used to be a crime here. And it was a crime during Jehoshaphat's day, and it's a crime because it's evil. It's evil. I know the world will tell you otherwise. The world will tell you, how many times have I said it? You love who you love. Or the heart wants what the heart wants. Or whatever. You can love anyone you want. But the Bible makes it clear that it's evil. And the Sodomites of Jehoshaphat's day, they may have been cult prostitutes. And so what they were doing is they were having homosexual sex in the name of religion, in the name of God. And so that was a great evil. It was a great evil that needed to be purged from Israel. And the fact that Jehoshaphat did something about it is so important that the Bible actually mentions it. Of all the things that Jehoshaphat's done, you read through First Chronicles, all the things that Jehoshaphat's done, this is one of the main things that's mentioned in Kings about what Jehoshaphat accomplished. I wish America would go back to its roots on this. I wish America would recognize that there is such a thing as sexual sin. Because today adultery is nothing. By the way, did you know that in New York State, adultery is still a crime on the books? You can still be charged with adultery. So they're working real hard. The Democrats are working real hard to remove that, to strike that law from the state of New York, because they don't want adultery to be a crime. The world will tell you there is no such thing as sexual sin if you love a person. But there is certainly, and God's word makes that abundantly clear, not just here, but in other places. So he gets rid of the remnant of the Sodomites who remained in the days of his father. Asa started the job. He started to rid the land of the Sodomites. Jehoshaphat expelled them from the land. He also took rule over the land of Edom. In verse 47, there was no king in Edom, a deputy was king. So the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, establishes his authority over Edom. And Edom is down here you'll see there, Israel's neighbor to the southeast. Down this area, there's not really much down there. There's not a whole lot down there. In fact, if you were, you'll see Basra in there, and it's just all rocky, stony land. But basically what happens is, He has authority over this land, and that when trade goes up through the Arabian Peninsula, it'll come up through the land of Edom, and when it comes across from Africa, it can come up the King's Highway through Edom, and so kind of controlling that land means controlling trade there, and of course through the Red Sea. And that's important because right here at the very tip, this is the Gulf of Suez here, and this is the Gulf of Aqaba. And right at the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba is a little city that today is called, anyone know the name of that city? Anyone take a guess? Starts with an E. Anyone? Eilat. And you may have heard Ezion Geber before from the Bible. That's really where the northern tip. So if you control the land of Edom, you're also controlling trade that's coming out of the Red Sea as well. So that's kind of a significant thing to mention here. But you'll see that there's no king in Edom. A deputy was king, and he's answerable to Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat wants to trade through the Red Sea, but he fails miserably in verses 48 and 49. Check this out. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold, and we're going to look at that, where that is in a second. But they did not go, for the ships were broken at Ezion Geber. That's that northern tip of the Red Sea there. Then Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships." But Jehoshaphat was not willing. So I thought this was kind of valuable to look at here. If you're looking at Ophir in the text, I drew an arrow. Can you see that arrow? I tried to make it big enough for you to notice the arrow. You see it? Ophir is right down at the tip there, across the Red Sea from the southwestern tip of the Arabian Desert. This is where it is today. So you kind of see Djibouti. So Ophir is basically Djibouti, and it's right across from Yemen, right across from the land of Sheba today. Well, way up at the northern tip there of the Red Sea is Ezion Geber. Solomon made that same venture where he would trade up and down through the Red Sea. He did that successfully, but Jehoshaphat's ships were destroyed. Check this out. Here's another little cross-reference out of 2 Chronicles, and we might spend a few minutes looking at that in the next couple of weeks. Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, allied himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel. He acted wickedly in so doing. I mean, listen, you don't make allies with evil people like this. So he allied himself with Ahaziah, that's Ahab's son, to make ships to go to Tarshish, and they made the ships in Ezion Geber. Then Eliezer, the son of Dodavahu of Mareshah, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, "Because you have allied yourself with Ahaziah, the Lord has destroyed your works." So the ships were broken and could not go to Tarshish. So what happens is Jehoshaphat, his work is getting ruined, and eventually he's like, "I'm not doing this with Ahaziah because God's hand of blessing is not upon it." He knew it was doomed to fail. And then we see the end of his reign in verse 50. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his, that means he died, and was buried with his fathers in the city of his father David, Jerusalem. And Jehoram, his son, became king in his place. And so we see the good reign of Jehoshaphat. Not perfect. There's some things in there. We got a list of stuff, right? We have a list of things like, I don't know about that. But we have a list of really good things that he did. Moral, ethical things he did. Some immoral things, like partnering with Ahab, like even having business with Ahaziah, and that was all doomed to fail. Good things, like ridding the land of the Sodomites, like focusing on worship of the Lord, that type of stuff. So we see one kingdom going in one direction, that is, they care about what God says, and their ruler cares about what God says, and not just verbally, but he's actually doing stuff that's consistent with what God says. He's actually carrying it out. And then we see the contrasting rule of Ahaziah in Israel, and this will be short. Ahaziah, we'll deal with Ahaziah's rule more in 2 Kings. We'll deal with this guy a little bit. We see the beginning and length of his rule in verse 51. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, became king over Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And he reigned 2 years over Israel. A short rule, short and evil. He walks in the way of his evil parents, Ahab and Jezebel. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. He walked in the way of his father. His father's name was? Just making sure you're paying attention. Walked in the way of his father and in the way of his mother, who, as far as we know, her name is Jezebel. And in the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, the first idolatrous king of Israel, who set up the idols of the golden calves in Dan and in Bethel, that guy. Could you imagine having your name listed alongside of Ahab and Jezebel and Jeroboam, 3 of the worst people in the history of mankind? You know what I mean? 3 of the worst people in the history of the northern kingdom, and your name's right there in the middle. Like Ruth, Mantle, Leap. I like that. Jeroboam, Jezebel, Ahab, Macaron. You're the bad guy in this illustration. I was a bad guy last time. You have to be even Stephen, No, you don't want your name with those guys. You don't want your name in the book of God's holy Bible with people like Jezebel or like Delilah or those types of people. You don't want your name with those people. These are the worst of the worst. And he's like, yeah, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And he walked just like his dad. He was just like his dad Ahab. He was just like his mom Jezebel. And he was just like that evil, wicked, the standard. By the way, the standard of evil kings. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. The standard, the first king of Israel. The standard idolater. That's what this guy's like. So he served Baal, and worshipped him, and provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. That's interesting because you have this comparison, and that's the comparison that I saw. What I saw was this. Oh man, where'd it go? There it is. What I saw was that Jehoshaphat did right in the sight of the Lord, that he walked in the way of his father, not perfect, but he did which was right in the sight of the Lord. And Ahaziah provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. He worshipped false gods. I like what one guy says about Ahaziah. He says this, and I quote, "The writer of Kings has nothing good to say about him. God, as he inspired his word, had nothing good to say about you." And I was like, can you imagine that? Man. God had nothing good to say about Ahaziah. Which one of those two guys? Which one of those two guys are you more like? Which description guy did what was right in the sight of the Lord, or the guy provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger? Which one of those describe you in your life? And that ends 1 Kings. In this passage, we see the different paths of Israel and Judah, at least for now. Judah's been led by kings who worshiped the Lord, like Jehoshaphat. Israel has been led by kings who worshiped idols, like Ahab, like here highlighted Ahaziah. Judah's been led by kings who did some good things, who did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. Israel has been led by kings who only did evil. Kind of reminds me of where we stand as a nation today. America's electing leaders who believe evil things, and the Democrat Party believes evil, anti-God things. There's no room in the Church of God for Satan's agenda. I told you I was going to say something about my brother's text this morning. He's telling me that in New York City, and by the way, as New York goes the nation. New York and LA start it, and the rest of the nation follow. And he says all babies in New York, all babies, whether they're male or female, and this might not seem like a big thing to you, but in context, it is. It's a big thing to me. They put pink hats on all the babies. And I said, let me tell you something. If I was having a baby in New York City, I'd bring my own knitted hat, bring a nice old, if I was having a baby boy, I'd bring, black or blue or something manly. It's like all I dress in. I dress in blue and black and gray. Do I pretty much wear anything else? I have a yellow shirt that Jeff gave me. Do I have anything else? Have any other colors? I have a red sweatshirt. I never wear it. I can't fit it anymore. It shrunk. What's it? Pull up my. Good point. Pull up my Excel spreadsheet on how my suits. But there's no way in the world I'm letting you put some pink hat on my little baby boy that's born so that you can confuse the lines of the genders, and blur those lines and confuse people and convince them of your anti-God agenda. That's what's going on here. What's going on here in America is you have two paths. You really have, listen, I don't think we have very many good politicians at all. Even the good ones aren't that good. Even the good ones are immoral for the most part. There might be a few out there that are decent. But on the positive, at least they're not following an anti-God agenda. We have an entire half of our political system. They're provoking the Lord to anger, just like the kings of Israel. And they're pushing the kinds of things, the kinds of anti-God things, like even like what we saw in this passage, like the stuff that Jehoshaphat was reading, they're calling good. They're calling evil good and good evil. Again, that kind of brings me back to the question. We see that from a political standpoint, from a national standpoint, but what about from a personal standpoint? What path are you heading in? Are you heading in a path toward the Lord, committed to Him alone, worshiping Him above all else, following what God says, and ignoring or rejecting or denying what the world says? Or are you a little bit like the kings of Israel? Maybe you claim to worship the Lord, but there are other gods. Maybe it's not Baal or Asherah like they had. Because some of those kings were syncretistic. That is, they worshiped the Lord and they worshiped Asherah. They worshiped multiple gods, some of those Israelite kings. Maybe you worship the Lord, but there are other priorities that you're putting ahead of Him. Things like your job, or things like money, finances, athletics, relationships, prestige, whatever. All types of things that you could put ahead of the Lord. Maybe you're buying into the Satan-dominated anti-God agendas that are out there today. Because that's what was ruling Israel, was Satan-dominated anti-God agendas. And that is what is becoming prominent. Prominent. I'll show you some charts if you want. Ask me about these charts that show you how the generations have been influenced and where we're going. And one of these charts showed, when we're coming back to like even things like the sexual preference. This generation, this percentage of people were, claimed to be, whatever, homosexual or whatever. Next generation, and then what's the current generation? Z, is it? What's the one right before that? Z, I think it was. Z was like this. So every generation was pretty much here, and Z was like this. The percentages were skyrocketing. Well, why do you think that is? It's because the nation is teaching Satan-dominated, anti-God stuff and confusing people, and they're buying into it. That's fact. That's fact. I saved those charts a couple days ago. I thought about showing them tonight, but I decided against it. You need to worship the Lord in Him alone and put Him first in your life. And when you do that, you will follow the path that you should be following, and your walk with God will thrive. Let's take our hymnals and turn to 388. 388.